in that it is necessary that all of life from the cellular to the institutional level must divide to live. Further, let me take a real basic launching pad. I think I'll use the idea of God, not that religion is that more important than anything else, because science is involved with the same thing, but religion is the oldest and the far-reachingest in its impact on people's thinking. I wanted to try and get you to see that ordinary old world intelligence cannot even do truly that which would seem to be at the very heart historically of human development, and then individually many people. Or many of you perhaps is no longer that important, but the idea of intelligence coming up with a single, omnipotent, unified God. Now that would seem, even if you're not religious, if you're following that God can be seen as also a paradigm for what is now science. And of course science is doing the same thing. Science now attempting to find more than ever a single unifying theory to explain everything, which seems to be, and it is, we're back to the division of words into that which dual consciousness finds has to either be this or that, which is not. But science sees the thrust and the move to find a single unifying theory as a movement forward, but in a sense it's a movement backward, which is the same thing, but in a sense it's a movement backward to find a single unifying, that is a one-celled answer. All right, some of you are chuckling, but in case you chuckled too soon, or those of you who didn't chuckle, let's press on with what may be an easier one to verbally grapple with, and that was what I started to use, the idea of God stripped of any religious connotations, which I'm sure all of you people can do by now. God is simply a word. God was original science. God was stupidity named before people knew better. But notice, it would seem to be historical without any doubt, right at the heart of civilization, right at the heart of man's evolution, socially, institutionally, and as I pointed out, to many, 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 many people's individual, personal wiring, the concept of God seems to be super important. But now note, ordinary intelligence cannot do the one thing that God would seem to stand for, or the scientific unifying principle, as they found it. It cannot do this one thing that would seem to be, as a matter of fact, the definition of God with a capital G. That is, that He is singular, He is omnipotent, and He's unified, right? Old world intelligence cannot even do that and does not notice it. Contraire. As soon as, historically, and then individually people go back and live through it when they hear about it and go, oh yeah. But historically it would appear thusly. Let's take good old Western religions. The Old Testament version. And Islam has a similar version, in case you're interested, but it doesn't matter. And Hinduism has a not dissimilar version, in case you're interested, which doesn't matter. And of course Buddhism being another story, which we don't get into. Well, I don't mind, but it wasn't on my agenda. All right, here it goes. It would seem to be, well, first off, it not seem to be, it is ordinary intelligence looking for and coming up with the concept of God as being the initial, the original attempt at science. It was the original manifestation of the intellect really getting up to speed, blowing off some of the inherent carbon, and beginning to function and to look for the answer. Comes up with the idea of God, and let's take the Old Testament version. As soon as it comes up with the concept of a unifying principle called God or Jehovah, what's the next thing that happens? Comes forth, it cannot hold, it cannot produce and hold a concept of this stable, unifying, omnipotent God, it immediately, just take the stories in Genesis, I guess it is, in the Old Testament, immediately what happens? It splits the concept, it divides the concept of God, and immediately, very shortly, produces a counter concept. It produces a splinter specter, the rebellious spin-off of God, which according to the Old Testament was Lucifer, an angel, one of God's favorite guys. And what happened? He rebelled. He spun off from the unifying principle, and he wanted to be a little God. Now, nothing is amiss. This is the way life grows. But what I wanted you to try and see a little more specifically since the last night time we were taping is that ordinary intelligence, through which life produces these ideas and this kind of energy, intelligence cannot see at all what's going on, that the forces flow through it, and it comes up with these attempted unifying principles, to wit, years ago, God, concept of God. There it is, the answer, the unifying principle, the answer for everything. But then, unnoticed, in the sense I'm describing it to you, this concept to stay alive, this idea, the same as everything else, from cellular, physical creatures to that which seems to be invisible ideas and concepts. They must divide to grow. And thus the stories come about that one of the unifying principle, in this case called God, it divides up. But it's called, given as mythological tales, of course, and actual, they put flesh and blood like it sounds as though it was a political struggle. That he had this right-hand man, one of his favorite guys, which he had to come from God if God was it, if that was the original source, then this thing divided from him, or from it. And so Lucifer is a division of God. The cell split up, and this thing tries to take over. And no one notices that the very thing that seems to be driving the intellect to seek a unifying force also cannot hold the force, or it would die. To hold the force as being a singular unifying entity or principle would kill it. That would be the end of it. For it to continue to live, for the concept of God to continue to permeate the life of humanity as it has, requires that there be an anti-God. It requires that the concept, the unifying concept, call it God or the unifying principle, must split. There must be the splinter specter begin to haunt the original God, begin to threaten it, begin to always potentially be its adversary. It ends up that the original idea, and as I said with some people, the continuing, at least in its importance, concept of a God, has got to split up to where part of it becomes its own nemesis, which is one of those little words that life lets slip in every now and then. You know, nemesis is not actually synonymous with adversary or enemy, because nemesis does not say that the adversary or the opposition might be victorious. Nemesis is simply an adversary that cannot be bested, that cannot be defeated, which I'm not exactly sure. I'm not going to tell you why life even let that slip in to the human vocabulary, because it really has very little use. Now I think about it, all of you should start watching, or maybe I will, is what few times in your life you ever see nemesis used. See if the person actually used it in that way. I bet they didn't, because what sense, this is really an aside, but of what use is that to ordinary intelligence to have an adversary, and all it states, the definition of nemesis is simply an adversary that can't be beat. What use is that of ordinary intelligence? Think about it. Or else don't think about it, it might spook you. Just life has its own little humors, I guess, that lets these things slip out. Once this split is made, the division, and this is true all over the world, and I'll repeat one more time, at least for you people, you know it, but out there on tape, people might be seeing this at other times and other places. I will assume for your benefit that you're not wasting your time, that you can get past any kind of literal notions of religion and God, and to shake yourself from whatever seems to be your own genetic immediate tribe of your family, because it was representing and continues to represent something else. But once this division is made all over this planet, everywhere they got a concept of a God, and everybody, once they've got a concept of a God, all you got to do is go 1, 2, 3, count 3 or 4, and the main chief, the high priest, somebody's going to fall into a swoon and say, wait a minute, I just had a new dream. This will be probably the same guy that came up with the idea of the original God, or else his son. And he'll say, wait a minute, there's a new dream came to me. Hold it, hold it. And the new dream is that the God, whatever it was, the tree God, it just turned out that there was some kind of blight fell upon the tree, and it's trying to kill our great tree God. It's the blight God, the anti-God. It happens everywhere. And they take its ordinary, simplistic world intelligence takes it literally, as it's supposed to. But what it is representing is what I am trying to get you to further proceed tonight. It is the unrecognized reality that all concepts, all things that live, whether they be concepts or physical entities, have got to divide to grow. And so the idea of a God, for anyone, if ordinary humanity understood it, those that believe that they are religious and curse God, or believe that the point of being religious or the point of being a human is to help defeat God. Do you realize how what should we call it? If they were operating in an actual intellectual, reasonable mode, what should we call it? Oh, unprofitable this approach is. Specious. That we're going to defeat that which is part of the concept. Not just the next angel that fell out of grace. We're talking about physically it would be a part of the original concept. But at any rate, once this is done, I wanted to point out something else. Once the division is made, which it is all over the world, every group, including atheists, every group has a notion of a supreme unifying force and its nemesis. They don't call it that. But consider the Western version of God and Lucifer. Let's stick with that for a second to make it easier so I don't have to keep expanding every time I mention God. Once this division is made all over the world, then there arises Faustian tales. And I'd like for you to consider to what ends. Of course, they're not known as Faustian tales in Albania and outer Mongolia, but they have their versions all over the world, that once you have got the division of the good unifying force, the God, and then its nemesis, it was a spin-off of the original concept, the original creature, Lucifer, the evil part. Then all over the world you've got these tales of these kind of Faustian bargains wherein humanity, maybe represented by one human, goes to seek out knowledge. Of course, in the tales it's always knowledge with a capital K, or in quotation marks, or a raised eyebrow, or secret knowledge, dangerous knowledge. And where do they go? Does anybody, in all of your reading, have you ever heard of anyone going to the God? They always strike a bargain. They always seek out what? The nemesis, the spin-off. To what end? And trust me, it's not just in Western literature. It is not just from Goethe and the other versions of Dr. Faust conjuring up Lucifer. All over the world there are tales, whether it be an intricate part of their religion or whether it just be embedded in their folklore to the point that it's almost accepted as being a ritualistic description of something metaphorically in man, of seeking knowledge. But the tales always come to a sad end, because whether it's a Dr. Faustus in the Western world of a literate man, or whether it's some little farmer over in Burma that tries to conjure up some kind of spell to get even with some of his enemies, or his mother-in-law, or to kill his wife, or he just wants power, they always conjure up Lucifer. They always go to the evil part, as they call it. Why? What is verbally afoot? What is life? What information is life letting out verbally that no one recognizes? You've heard the story so much, whether you ever thought it was important or not, you just accept the fact If somebody's going to try and get secret knowledge, new knowledge, they never go to God. Why? You never thought about it. And why is it if they do go to the, quote, evil part, and the evil part says, okay, I know what you want, I got it. And it makes a bargain, the end of the story, whether it be the Dr. Faustus, or whether it be this simple little farmer over in Southeast Asia, he gets the secret knowledge, and what happens? It's always a very sticky ending. It's not at all what the good doctor or the farmer imagined. In other words, he pays for it. It's a bad bargain. What is life trying to tell men? I shouldn't be so literarily melodramatic for you people that may be just singing this. Life's not trying to tell men anything. I use that kind of figure of speech sometimes. I'm asking the people here, what is it that life is doing that you might find life is inadvertently telling you, because it's not really trying to tell men anything. If it wanted to tell you whatever the reality behind this, it would simply say, hey, and everybody go, yeah, and then go, up. And it'd say, I'm off on Wednesdays from now on, or whatever it wanted to tell you, it'd tell you. It'd say, I don't take credit. I am not going to give you an answer to my question as to what end might life have in mind by these stories, which are a form of energy. They're not just secondary hobbies of life, because life does not have secondary activities. Not that I care to talk about. The stories are an important movement of energy, and they are worldwide. Everyone is affected by this passage of energy that appears to be story, religious tales, religious truths, whatever they're called. So my question to you that I was asking, to what ends is life arranged things so that there are these stories everywhere, that the unifying, the good force, the creative force, the original force, the God, shows himself, creates everything, makes himself known, and just almost immediately, very soon is a technical term. They're my terms, it's my science, my history, so I'm going to tell you the technical term is very soon. Trust me. Very soon after the God does all this, he splits. He divides, and there's a spin-off. Then you've got the anti-God, the Lucifer, the fallen angel, the rebellious courtier that is now a nemesis of the original, unifying, good, creative God concept. And so I'm asking you, once that is done, why all over the world are there tales of people from high and low positions then decide that they want secret knowledge? And without any exception, they never, in the stories, they don't ever sit around and go, let's see, I got my choice of God or Lucifer, who will I go to? It's not even mentioned. You just accept it. Everyone accepts it. The guy wants secret knowledge. He thinks, all right, how, is Lucifer's number listed? There's just no question. And so I'm asking you, to what possible ends has life arranged that kind of verbal energy? Well, I'm not giving you an answer now, but to help perhaps some of you glide on to a more profitable area rather than stall out there, let me point out, let me just tongue lash you or verbally ramble. How about this? The Lucifer part, the spin-off in the 3D world would be a newer part. It would be a younger part. It would be a fresher part. Even if it was just, I won't say a split second, because the technical term is very soon. But it's very soon younger than the original cell, the original concept. Thus being younger, this is always the case in the 3D world, it always has the potential to be more complex. Or how about another possibility of men through these stories always seeking secret knowledge through the spin-off. Now if they didn't take into consideration the spin-off, the Lucifer, that nobody even considered that, and In the same way that now they never consider God in the stories, the original force. If it was otherwise, if life had a range and people, they even consider that part, they thought, well, I want to go to the original source. You would then be talking about something that was still, as far as that person was concerned, their awareness, that is still unified. And a unified something doesn't know anything. It would have no knowledge to bargain for. That is, if there were not a Lucifer. And the idea in somebody's mind, like, well, if there is a Lucifer, it's some sort of metaphorical concept because it couldn't be of any consequence. I want to go to the big source. And if you could then divide, separate yourself from the original division, and you could find the initial concept, the God, before he divided. When God was in charge before Lucifer bugged him, before there was a spin-off, if you found such a thing, it would have no knowledge worth bargaining for. It wouldn't know anything. All right, how about a variation of that? If there was truly a single, omnipotent, unified God, and you went and tried to bargain with him, but you had some concept, or you thought you could find him with this unified, omnipotent God, then if the thing did exist like that, and did know something, then I got to point this out to you. It wouldn't want to share it. I'm understating it in the vernacular. It wouldn't want to share it. There is a little piece of a sidestep would be perhaps interesting to some of you. Consider off at least one step to the side, there is an unappreciated, absolutely undervalued efficiency to a general theme that runs throughout religious ideology throughout the world. The West not accepted, all the Western religions. And that is this, that evil, the splinter from the original group, the rebellious division from the initial good, unified concept of God. This concept, this idea that evil exists only so far as God, or sometimes they include man, allows it to exist. Now, whether you notice it all, you heard that, even if you've never been inside of a church in your life, you heard that somewhere. If you couldn't help it before you could stop up your ears from some movie or from some TV, some little priest, or some guy fighting corrupt governments hollers out about the nature of evil, and then somebody a little philosophically inclined in the movie or the novel or the TV show will say, well, you know, evil only exists insofar as man allows it to exist. Or sometimes God allows it to exist, and then sometimes they'll make both. Consider the efficiency of life putting out that information. Whether you sit around thinking about it, it still affects you. That if there is a splinter, if there is a spin-off, if there is a rebellious, near antagonistic aspect that is split off from the original unifying good one, then it actually only exists. It continues to exist. It continues to breathe and be nourished only through our allowing it to exist. Think what a beautifully efficient stroke of energy that is, that from on high, apparently, if we keep it in a religious context, or at least from a black hole of science, it comes that if there is evil, you could read more simplistic forces, you could read stupidity, but if there is evil, it continues to thrive only because men allow it to. You realize that then if we talk back about an initial unified force, and it splits, and then men are now in a dualistic frame of mind, and see it as being the possible goodness and truth here and this over here, that which is not good, that which is not true, then the original force has, in a sense, says, well, it's not my fault. It's you people's fault for being aware of it. Huh? No, we're just saying, well, you people think there's evil. And you people say that's partly my fault. Or I threw the pretender to the throne out. Or I threw this prince angel away. And some of the people, they blame me. I hear you people down there. You say, well, if God's all that great, why does he let evil exist? Listen, if evil exists down there, it's because you allow it to exist. They don't make sovereigns like that anymore. Of course, the truth is they never did. I had to point it out for you. But they do not make tyrants. They do not make forces. They do not make concepts that clever. Not verbally, it happens. But verbally, it's never described because it would be too clever. And of course, don't any of you people ever repeat this, and probably you couldn't. And if you did, it wouldn't sound right. But it's as though the great God, the unifying, the good, single, omnidirectional, omnipresent, unified force divides as it must to live, and then as it always, the division, if it's just one cell, is in some way going to be in competition. If it's just a cellular division inside of you, then you've got two cells seeking the same blood, the same nourishment, so there's some competition. It's not necessary that one cell is going to beat another. That's why I call them nemesises instead of opponents or adversaries. But they are in at least competition. So you do have the basis of the framework of there being a God and then a demon or a Lucifer. You've got that. But then it's as though the God, after the people says, well, wait a minute, we're conscious of this now that you're no longer fully in charge. You let this specter loose on us, at least in our intelligence, if not on our planet. Look at all the injustice and blah, 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 and the tax bracket I'm in nowadays. How could you let this happen? And then it's as though the guy said, well, all right, I'm not going to say I didn't have anything to do with this starting. But my God, it's been going on for 2,000 or 3,000 years down there, you people. If there's evil still going on, if this thing is still going on, it's because you allow it to go on. He walks off and you're left with you still don't like it? How about a king? The people are starving. They begin to storm the castle, at least enough that they interrupt his sleep, and he comes out and he listens and he hollers, well, all right, I'm not going to say I didn't have anything to do with raising taxes and making it harder. I was taking more and more of your crops, but that was a while back. If you people are still starving, it's your fault. And he leaves, and everybody thinks, oh yeah, you're right. He said, even if he's taking everything you got. But he announces, hey, don't blame me. You allow it to happen. And some of them out there might mumble, well, wait a minute, you send out these guys and they take everything. As soon as we got a potato that looks big enough to eat, somebody's standing right behind us and they take it out of the ground. And he said, well, you let them? If hunger still exists, it's because you allow it. For you people at other times and other places on the tape, I'll remind you for tonight that I do not bring out such as this and verbalize it in any form of social criticism, not even close. It is a matter of what is going on that you never consider. There is the general necessity of what I brought up last time of the division. There is a general necessity that a real explorer has got to have a quite clear and immediate and as long as necessary awareness that in every living cell, creature, institution, idea, there will be division. And that there is nothing, although history and although ordinary old world intelligence tells you otherwise, there is nothing whatsoever strange, amiss, questionable in the fact that you will always, in every religion, you will have schisms. In every political movement, you will have factions. In every artistic era, you will have schools. Now you may think that you do not go around pondering this all the time, but that too affects you. Turn on the news. What is bad news? Which is the news? Besides it being outdated, which always makes it bad because that which is outdated is already beginning to rot, and that's why all news, almost as soon as you can hear it, is already bad news, no matter what it was. Because even if it was good news and you just heard about it, it's bad news because you missed it. If it was good news, hey, they were giving away free beer. Well, when? Well, just before I left. You mean still now? Well, no, they stopped. That's why I left. So it's no longer good news, it's bad news. You missed the free beer. So we've been through that before, but that's the basis that all news is bad news. That's a wide basis. But there is another way to perceive it. Is it due to the fact that everything that is alive internally will divide and apparently go into conflicting modes? That inside, that once you believe that you were a die-hard Republican or Democrat, and look what, just in our lifetime, has happened to the Democrats. Considered once to be in American politics, and I'm not talking about politics, that's not the point, I'm using this as flesh and blood for you people out there to get you to try and perceive something else, that you had what appeared to be the left wing. The left wing faction in our political body in America, as recently as 25 years ago, that the Democrats represent the left wing and the Republicans represent the right wing. Then the left wing split, as all things do, and it became like the far left, the extreme liberal, has begun to take control. I'm just using ordinary descriptions of this, during the Vietnam era. And then you had sort of the mainline, I guess they'd call themselves, or the mainstream, the old line, the red dog, or the yellow dog Democrats. But then you had the extreme left. So then you had not only the right wing faction and the left wing faction, those two schisms, which you got to have in the body politic. No matter what it's called, it doesn't matter. You just think it matters. There's no difference between Democrats and socialists or communists and Republicans. But at any rate, it splits. And what was once the left wing now became the extreme left wing, and then the center left wing. And now, just after a few years, if any of you keep up, I'm just trying to show you because this is the way the things happen out historically. Now, that which was the right wing has now become the center because over here when it divided the liberal, that is the Democrats, the extreme, the far left of the left wing over here, then had the nucleus, as it were, of the division, and it's the one that grew, and it's as though the center of the Democratic Party laid down and died. And so now it's so far left that now the Republicans have moved over, and they seem to be almost the center of where the Democrats used to be. Now that's important politically. I just assume that some of you have made some note and hear enough. The point that I was trying to get you to look at through all of this, the general is that all news, even though you, as I said, you may not think that you ever consider about that all religions are split up in political parties and all artistic movements are always split up into factions, that you don't go around pulling your hair worrying about it. But it still affects you because all news is bad news, and all news is always what? It always seems to be a new retelling of either some old adversarial relationship between countries, between institutions, labor, management, between the Democrats, the Republicans, between the young, between the old, between the Russians, between the West. That is always going on, and it seems to have a pressing, immediate, threatening stance. And the belief is that if we're working toward progress, like science should be, looking for the unifying principle, what we're looking for is to do away with all confrontation. And thus, since we have not accomplished it, all news seems to be bad news. That whatever they're reporting on the news is some form of bad news, and if you look at it, if you listen to it, you can see it as something, whatever it was, art, labor, commerce, business, some social manifestation, some intellectual manifestation start out as a cell somewhere. It may have apparently had a rebirth here in our lifetime or even 2 months ago. Or it could be, if you can see it, there has been a historical lineage for thousands of years. But here it is, and now there seems to be a conflict, something that might affect you. This big business is the oil company is going to finally destroy the environment. Do you see that that is a split? It has divided. Something started somewhere, and it is now divided as it must. And the division itself will always make things appear ominous, or make it appear to be a specter, an ominous, a shadowy, if nothing else, lurking figure that at any time could wreak havoc. You cannot have a cell, an institution, an idea to divide, not one of which you are drawn to take as having some pertinence. You cannot be aware of it. You cannot think about it. Your nervous system cannot react to it without finding one part of the division as being threatening. Therefore, all of life appears to be, in part, threatening. You know, you've got life, and then you've got its partner, what? Death. And so you always got, well, there's some kind of threat going on. There's always a specter haunting me somewhere, right over my shoulder. You need to see, quite simply, that anytime you've got, I can say blank, and you fill it in, any religion, any institution, any idea, any philosophy, any hobby, any idea you had, if it lives, it will fracture itself. There is nothing amiss. There is nothing. It's only life's body that produces apparent social commentators and critics that laugh at religions, that laugh at Judaism as being split up and being almost fighting each other over whether you're Orthodox or whether you're Reformed. Or the Christians, how long they've been slaying themselves apparently on the basis of whether they're Catholic or whether they're Protestant. And of course that is long gone, and that's the Protestants have split up into where they're Protestant factions killing each other, apparently over religion, which they're not. That's just a hobby. That's a secondary explanation. It has divided, and they are one another's nemesis at the very least. But to believe, as your nervous system would want to if you took it into any serious consideration, to believe that, well, things are in a sorry state, or something's wrong, that's not real religion that you've got as soon as it gets started. And religion X is based upon somebody said, the original God said we should all not hate each other. We consider it kind of a laid back rather than we should love each other. We should all not hate each other as much as we do. And it sounds good. And the guy leaves town. Remember the technical description, I want you to remember. Very soon after that, they split up. And they begin to fight over, well, how much should we not hate one another? And then parts of life's body, as it should, produces other spectators that go, that's horrible. It may even be silly. No, it's not that bad. It's horrible. It's despicable. Something should be done. There's nothing to be done. There's nothing wrong. It is healthy. It is vital. Or it would not have divided. There would not be a schism in any religion, any political party, any social club, any bird-watching society, any association of like-minded librarian readers or librarianists. If the little group is going to continue, it's going to fracture. If a cell is going to live, it's going to divide. It doesn't matter if the institution seems to be the American Association of Drunkards or the Reformed Church of North American Lutherans. It's the same thing. Don't get distracted by whether they're calling it something that seems to be important or something that seems to strike your intelligence as need be or should be unified, such as science or religion. If it's alive, it's got fractures, it's got schisms. Now, taken down to from the history level down to the personal level, let me point out, well, in general, and then let me, a slightly different way in general, and then let's see if I can't make you see it a little bit more personally. Within themselves, all living things must have differing views of itself, or it cannot live. All things, all ideas, all institutions, all creatures, all beings, within themselves, to live, have got to have varying views of themselves, which are different inputs, different forms of energy. But we'll leave it at the good verbal, apparently making sense level. They have got to have varying views of themselves. They have got to, even further, they've got to have varying views of their own aim, their own methods, their own history. I think that was too direct. Most of you are waiting for something else. Every institution to be alive within itself, forget now apparent outside critics, forget apparent outside attacks of Christianity, of God, Jehovah, and Lucifer now being attacked by Muhammad, Allah, and crazed Arabs. Forget that. Within itself, within any institution, within any living entity, there must be within itself varying views of itself, or it cannot live. It is very short-lived, and it certainly cannot grow. And a little more specific that I may not get into, but you can pursue it on your own, it has, to break that down a little bit more, it has to have varying views of its own aim, its own purpose. It has to have varying views of the methods. Do I like the way I'm doing? Do I like some of the things I've done in the past? Should I change my methods? Should I refine it? Should I drop this one? Should we take another approach? They have to have differing views, each entity. Differing views of its own history. That is, its memory must be fractured. We've got to turn the tape over. But a little more enriched, a little more refined is what I'm trying to get you to see now, that all entities, remember, ideas, institutions, creatures, beings, anything alive within itself, I'm just trying to refine your sight a little bit, must have within itself, not outside observation, not outside criticism, within itself, within the body of the church, within the body of the Democratic Party, within the body of Islam, within the body of Albania. And of course we're going to get something more interesting in a second. There has to be within the entity varying views of itself, or it cannot grow. Now I've already given away the punch, not the punch line, but the next punch step. This is true with people, with individual nervous system, at the intellectual level, which is the only place, of course, it's possible. You have got to have just ordinary humans, as a matter of fact. I don't mean just you people, but you have got to have varying views of yourself to grow. And I'm not now speaking of any kind of extraordinary growth. I'm talking about to survive, to grow as a human being, to grow as an ordinary human. Each human in the nervous system up at the verbal level is filled with varying views of itself, as it must be. But how is this interpreted? As good news? Not on your Alabama Life. People pay money to analysts, to priests. They take up with drugs and alcohol on a serious basis. Not a good secondary basis, on a serious basis. Attempting, without knowing it, to do something without knowing it. Some of you already guessed what I was going to say. That is, apparently, to do away with the varying views of themselves. Like sometimes I like me, which is okay. Of course, it almost gets to the maniacal level. And then other times I don't like me and I get extremely depressed. I probably need a psychiatrist or another case of Jim Beam. Besides the funniness, whether you ever seek help, there is the feeling in everyone. It's all of you. There's no exception. All you had to be was human. That there were varying views that you had of yourself, and your feeling, your belief was, whether you express it in these words or not, that there should be a more unified view of yourself. And people go to literal efforts, they expend literal efforts to do so, such as, let's say you have the varying views of yourself that many people have, and one of the views is, of these varying views, one of them, let's take physically, is that I do not like all the time the way I look. Sometimes I get a glimpse of me, or sometimes when I overeat I'm too fat, I don't like the way I look at a certain level, and so somebody will go spend money, exert effort, go to a spa, to take up running, lifting weights, doing whatever it is, go on diets, to change the way they look. But it's not just to change the way they look. What they're attempting to do is to try and bring about a unification internally of their view of themselves. Sometimes the direct just goes right through. It's like pig through Orson Welles, isn't it? It is not looked at by any ordinary intelligence in this way, but without knowing it, they are attempting to cut down. I'll put it to you in a slightly wider version rather than the attempt to unify their view of themselves. They're trying to cut down on some of the various views internally of which they do not approve. Now they say I'm too fat, but that's not what it is. What they're trying to do is do away with the view of themselves that I'm too fat. Because were it not for this view, if you could be conscious and still have a non-verbal and not have a verbal level operating, which is impossible, if you could, no human, no creature without the verbal level would think it was too fat or too ugly or too thin or too tall. It could not. It's impossible. No rhinoceros, assuming a rhinoceros ever got overweight, no rhinoceros under any conditions could ever look down in the pool or pass a storefront window and go, you know, I'm getting a little. It is not the physical attribute that the person is attempting to change. I know that's the way it appears, and that is the way it manifests itself at the 3D simplistic level. But what they're trying to do is to change that one of the views they have of themselves that says, I don't look right. I'm too thin. I'm too fat. I'm too weak. They're trying to change that view. Sometimes Friday I try to be very direct since we got short time, and you people go, where's the obtuseness? Well, no. I know how dangerous it can be, how slippery. All right, someone who does not like the way they look. Let's say that somebody's got a nose, you know, that would make Julius Caesar, where he here go, you know. And the person worries. They try to save up their money. They try to find a doctor. They go through all the worrying about, should I have rhinoplasty? Could I afford it? Who should I trust? Or any other thing you want. Losing weight, gaining weight. I wish I would look better. Whatever it is. You do understand this. You just don't ever think about it this way. The person who's going to the trouble to lose weight or to build muscle so I, you know, look big can beat up women and children on the beach. You do know, I'm going to tell it to you straight, you do know this, don't you? Because you got yourself to go by. If the person says, I want to look different, I want a smaller nose, I want to lose weight, and I hate to go through all this, and I say, well, all right, I can do this. I can help you try and lose weight, or I'll come out and jog with you, and I'll give up sugars along with you, or I can do this. I know how to get into your brain, and I know the place where the pattern runs through there that you continually think, I'm overweight. I can go in, I can just do this, I'm going, and you won't ever think, you'll never think that again. Now I said I was being direct. All of you do hear me, don't you? Ordinary intelligence just never thinks of this. It's beyond the scope of the way people are supposed to think. If I could do that, that'd be the end of it. It doesn't matter then what you weigh or how big your nose is, as long as you do not have the view of you. And it's got to be various views. So it can't be one view, because one of your views doesn't like that view. That is, one of the views says I'm overweight, and another view says, yeah, but I'm not going to pay the price to lose weight. Or one view says I don't like my nose, and another one says, yeah, but I'm not going to pay $5,000. Or another view even says, well, if we had the $5,000, I am not going in there and let some doctor break my nose and bandage up my face, and God knows. If I could, in other words, if you're worried about your nose or your weight, and I said, all right, I can go in there and I'll go zit, and you will never again, you just never, trust me, you will never again have any personal thought about weight. It just won't exist, no matter what happens. That if a whole crowd of people got around you and said, big nose, big nose, big nose, you wouldn't even hear it. You wouldn't know what it meant. It would no longer affect you. You do understand that there's the cure. Now you're not supposed to understand that. Well, you can understand it sort of when I tell you, but you're of course not ever supposed to stumble across that or think, you know, if I just didn't think about it, it'd be the same thing as doing it or not doing it. And if too many people did that, life would go. It'd start looking around. Back to the main stream where we were. All things are alive, thus must have. It's not anything unusual. They have got to have various views, varying views in them, of them. And yet men are driven. Life makes men, without any kind of particular verbal analysis along these lines, are attempting, through self-improvement as they call it, to stop the various views from a certain, oftentimes religious or metaphysical, or I guess nowadays almost psychological view with no spookiness attached to it. What do people believe would be a superior person? Not in some mystical sense, but a superior person, or even in a mystical sense. It would be a person that would what? Be single-minded. The slave of God, the original Abdullah. So those are one of the greatest names in Islam. Slave of God. If you're just single-minded, you never had a naughty thought. Boy, what a Christian you would be. What a Jew you would be to never feel any kind of hatred or animosity, no sort of greed, no sort of anger to your fellow man. You were just, unified. You'd be dead. But notice, it is still a feeling. People attempt to chant. People go and spend 30 or 40 years sitting in a Zen school, staring at their navel, trying to get to the point as they try and describe it, even though they will say, wait a minute, words don't cover it. But tell them, say, hey, I've heard that before. They say words don't cover it, but the moment of enlightenment is when suddenly the vicissitudes, the waves of the mind are suddenly stilled, and everything becomes perfectly clear, because everything then has a single source, and it's like I'm back to the unifying principle. I am back in touch with God, or the Buddhahood of the universe. Now everything is back to one. And if that could happen, at that simultaneous moment, you'd go. So the attempts at self-improvement, not just religiously, but people attempting to improve themselves, to improve their health. That there are things I eat, and one view of it is I love it. I would die for chocolate ice cream. But then there's another view in you that says, God, that's terrible. The fat content, forget the calories. What it's going to do to your cholesterol or whatever the current rage is in health. And so you got the varying views in you. And you think, well, to be a better person, I'd cut out chocolate. That's not it. What you really want to do is to cut out some of the varying views. But man is not equipped to deal with it in that way, so you deal with what is the secondary manifestation of it, that I will change my behavior. And it's the secondary aspect that people are dealing with. You can't go back and realize, well, all I've got to do, if I knew how, is not me. I know it's me apparently worrying about eating chocolate. And now I try to eat chocolate, and then I fall off the wagon, then I go back on the wagon, then I go on a binge, now I feel guilty. All right, rather than wrestling with the chocolate problem, what if you realize, all right, the chocolate problem is not a chocolate problem. It is on a secondary level, but the chocolate problem is the matter, the inherent matter of being alive, and of course being verbal, having language in my skull. I have various views of me, of my purpose, my aims, my methods, my history. And one of my various views of me is that I eat too much chocolate, or that I should not eat chocolate at all. So rather than wrestling with chocolate and trying to give up chocolate, what if I could give up that view? That is, that I never again thought of chocolate. Now I hate to get your finger sticky, but I'll point out that if that happened, then whether you eat chocolate or not leaves the conversation. There's nothing to say. I don't even want to say that it doesn't matter. See, I'm not even going to say it doesn't matter. I didn't say that. But you never think about it. There is no longer the chocolate question. Literally. Then do you understand there is no longer the chocolate problem if there's not the chocolate question? If there is not a view of something, it can't be a problem. You could weigh, through your own eating habits, you could weigh 827 pounds. But if you could take away the view of you, let's assume that the view of you would be that I perhaps have put on a couple of extra pounds here of late. And it stayed on your mind. If the view would go, it wouldn't matter if you weighed 2,000 pounds. It wouldn't matter how much chocolate you ate or did not eat if you did not have a view of you, a various view, regarding chocolate. And it doesn't matter whether it's chocolate pro or con, because if it's pro, you got a con view somewhere, you wouldn't have a pro view. You wouldn't think about it. You couldn't think about it. There would only be one word. Individually, beyond ordinary people being in that condition, what I wanted to at least leave you at that one place with, is try and perceive on your own that what seems to be the ambiguities in the human intelligence and human personality, the conflicting views that one has of oneself, the conflicting feelings, all the terminology that everybody uses nowadays and always has used. Understand there is nothing unusual, to say the least. It is a sign of health. It is a sign of vitality. Always. But now, for somebody attempting to do this, it is not enough just to be aware of it. The next stage is you have got to individually absorb all possible views that you have of yourself. You've got to absorb them. Not wrestle with them, not deny them, not argue with them. And I'm not even going to try and give you some kind of trick to do away with them. Because there's no trick. I told you how to do away with them. You remember that? How'd you stop that? I just did? No, really. It's a trick. That had nothing to do with what I was talking about for you people who was watching the tape. It was a non-psychedelic flashback from Birmingham. Meridian. The Chunky Blues Festival. For somebody attempting to do this, you have got to absorb. It's as though you have got to grab them all and hug them. You have got to absorb all possible views you've got of yourself. This also includes everything that life, the biological history of life itself, everything that life has run through you. That is, everything that's apparently happened to you, which we've already, have I not, in a more enlightened and humane way, tried to laugh and kick and ridicule and show you how cute and silly it is to believe that what's happened to you in life actually happened to you, much less that what happened to you had any bearing on what you are. So, you have got to try and absorb, to try and hold simultaneously the various views that you seem to have of you and that which the biological history of life itself apparently has run through you through all these years. That is apparently what happened to you. There is no way that you can ever subsist in a new intellectual territory once you even get close to it. You cannot subsist there. There is no kind of life-sustaining rations available if you continue to deal with only two views of yourself. And that's what various views amounts to. Because there's always two views. It just apparently changes the subject, whether we're talking about that whether you smoke too much or whether you drink too much, whether you eat too much chocolate or whether you don't get enough exercise. It all seems to be various views that makes up the complexity of modern man. But it amounts to still dualistic food. You cannot have dualistic rations and grow. You can't even subsist in any new intellectual area. Because then you find yourself there standing on the banks or standing on the shore of Virginia or North Carolina, and on your back is Ferdinand and Isabel and everybody you borrowed money from, those who say you're not really in a new place, you just went around the block. This is actually Atlantis. We didn't go anywhere. We just sailed around the edge, the realm of a flat earth. Well, we got a few minutes. I'm going to consider this to be the end of the public tape. Back on? Yes. Well, all of you people here and all you people in the so-called groups in the other cities, that's groups, not oops. That's with a G. I didn't have anything particular to say, but since I stopped the tape and played like we were going to have some sort of private message, here it goes. There are a lot of things a person could do, I guess. Standing around, let's say, on a platform. They're at the train station. There appears to be a train station. Then you could apparently be standing around for a while. You apparently stand around, and one of the various views you have of you standing around could be, not sure I've stood around here a long time. Some of you could even think, well, I've stood around here so long, I wish I could go somewhere else, but I can't seem to. I'm not all that upset, but I keep standing here. What might be happening? What if you started listening? Of course, you could always, I guess, hear the wind blow and the trees wave in the breeze. But then what of any sort of apparent human, specifically human significance, might you listen for? There's always a possibility of what was that? And it sounds like that somebody kind of went, scratched on the mic at the PA system there in the station, that somebody may be fixing to announce something. You know, who knows, a train, or a train's crashed, or a train's not coming, or might be calling out names like is Mr. Siegfried Goldfarb here. But you kind of hear maybe a noise. Was that the PA about to start? Or you might listen real close. You might think, is that a whistle? Did I hear a whistle? You might look around, you seem to be alone, or you seem to be other people, except nobody talks. So let's say alone. Then suddenly you thought you heard a voice. Not with a PA, but just a voice. I guess somebody might even get down if you didn't seem to be anything going and put your ear to the rail, and you might think, is that a noise? Is that something I hear coming? Do any of you get the suspicion that there is a reality to me saying that it was the end of Act 1 somewhere along the line? I hadn't said I've done it yet. I said I was in the process. And if you're going to feel better, you got to do better. If you're going to feel good, you got to do some good. Of course, the problem is you don't know what good is. You think it's go out and do good. Anybody can go out and do good. But you ought to suspect that the ultimate cannot be to just get to the point that you could stand around on the platform and not stand around, the train come, not come. You could hear some noise, not hear something for a while. Apparently be pleased with history, then apparently be pleased with you personally. Then mix them both up and come up with some kind of new club sandwich and think, well, it's not bad. There is a bit of this in ordinary life, which is not what I was going to mention to you people after the public tape, a reflection of this, but there is a more serious reality that I'll probably get into someday soon to try to sketch out some more, but it's this, that you cannot let new information, you cannot get into new territories yourself and let a certain thing happen that is always nipping at people's heels, to say the least. And that is of having new information, new intelligence, and it, in a sense, begins to render you almost impotent. I said that to get your attention. It almost renders you lacking any great motivation to act. You can almost have such fun inside your own brain. You begin to have enough personal insight into the nature of life to where all the apparent conflicts that have been shaking your nervous system, apparently plaguing your sensibilities and your ideas and feelings of decency all these years, you begin to see life for what it is. And it can almost begin to slip upon you. Sometimes I call it ennui, which is also to get some of you people's attention because it's not simple boredom. But it can almost render you to the point that you can just hang around and almost have no great inclination to do anything in particular. And those of you that get some real sight should see how just that is. It's mathematically just. It is predictable up to a certain point. It's what I was attempting to that rhyme I made up for you. Was it last Friday? The fact that people can't help what they do could certainly serve to debilitate you. But once it is known, and you still struggle on, then it's no longer exactly true. In 3D world, of course, that's insane. To say you can't do so-and-so, for instance. I've changed the flesh on it and say, well, you can't do so-and-so. Everybody says, okay, and then say, all right, and once you begin to see that for yourself that you can't do it, yeah, say it for myself. Once you see that you can't do it for yourself, not theoretically, but you see personally that this can't be done, that it's a fact. We're talking about serious facts here. That you see that's true, then believe it or not, it's not completely true anymore. And one of your viewers would say to you, give me a break. Are you sure? What would be the sense in trying to do the possible? Which is what people do. When I said do good, I wasn't speaking morally. When I said if you're going to get better, if you feel better, if you can think better, if you are better, then you can't become impotent. You can't begin to be a layabout forever. Well, what does it mean to say if you do good, if you feel good, you got to do good? And if I say it has nothing to do with morality, doing good would be what then? Well, it couldn't be simplistic. It couldn't be the obvious. It couldn't be acting simply as a mechanical nemesis for some aspect of life as it is, could it? You'd be as simplistic as that. That's like trying to learn from a failure. It would have to be more complex. It would have to be ultimately, verbally here for a second, it would have to be that you were attempting the impossible. Oh, all right. Attempting that which doesn't appear to be possible. Because to do good is what everybody else would attempt to do, which is a synonym for the possible. That's why it appears to be good. Whether they call it religiously or humanistically, anything they say to do good is something that they conceive of as being possible. Well, yes, I can go out and give these people some money. I'll do good in life. I'll start giving them half of my money. Well, if I can do that. And if you want to, do it. It's just a hobby. It's a secondary activity. But that is what ordinary people think of as doing good. To actually do good around the corner, you got to be dealing with that which is not necessarily in the immediate realm of the possible. But it's no good. It's too simplistic. It's retrogressive. And you may even feel like you're in the avant-garde, such as scientists looking for the single unifying principle, pushing forward, which it is forward to their view, but in a sense, I'm telling you, in a quite valid, varying view, they're attempting to go backwards. Ordinary people, in their attempt to do good, in a sense, are going backwards. Not that they didn't help feed somebody or whatever the manifestation was, but them internally. They're attempting to go backwards. Because that which they conceive of as being good is that which is potentially at least possible for them. And so it's simply a restatement, a reinforcement of their own simplicity, their own present state. That's why doing good, this is hidden in religions. Now I'll conclude, any of you who are interested. Life still lets these things slip out, but in all religions it says somewhere, one way or the other, in some kind of story or something that the story points over here, and it says, all right, to be a good blank, Jew, Christian, Buddhist, is to do so-and-so. And then it'll say somewhere along in there that, if you do this, of course, it doesn't count. That is, what we've described, or what the God sent down, or some prophet, what is described institutionally as being what would be a good act, go forth and do it. And then it says, it spins off this dangerous specter that's not recognized, that says, well, yeah, but that's possible. Anybody that does that, it doesn't count for shit anyway. You can do it. That's why it's pointed out. Well, I thought maybe some more of you would hear that. In other words, if you succeeded at the city level at the old level of doing that, which seems to be good, if you succeeded, I hate to say it, but you know what's coming, you would have failed. If you find the unifying principle, and you believe that you found it, and you did find it as far as you can tell, you're done for. You failed. The thing is, you've got to be able to absorb the various views in you that are necessary. That there is no single correct view of you, even from you to you. And it's not a selection process to pick out the ones you like. You've got to take them all and absorb them. And then you can get on the Nina or Sheba or somebody and you can sail away. You can at least cross the Mississippi and you go into new territory. But you go into new territory and there is no particular view you've got of you. There is no particular view you have of anything. There is certainly no dualistic view, because if there is, you're going to starve. You'll be in a new area, you'll be in new territory, and you'll be eating food that does what? Makes you hungry. You'll be eating food that has negative calories. The more you eat, the more you go backwards. The more you eat, the further you seem to be trudging through the new land, the closer, you don't know it, the closer you come back to the throne room. You're back to Barcelona or Madrid or wherever you sail from. This should be simple enough. Well, if you're getting too used to being a layabout, it's to the point that I know some of you, I've never told you, but I'm fully aware that some of you now find here and in tapes in other cities even, that you find this almost is real high class entertainment, that you feel as though that you do not get necessarily in the same quantity the kinds of shocks that you did for a while, that now it seems to just flow, that it's still intriguing, it's still entertaining, it's things that you would have never thought about, and it begins to tie up more and more of the little ends, not necessarily loose ends to you of history and the universe, but even things you never even thought about. You knew they were there, and it's just more and more fascinating. But it's almost now, it's not me trying to convert you, you don't even have that illusion anymore, that you are converted, it's over. And that, you know, if you die now, you got no real complaint. Not theoretically. You won't die as a Christian or a Jew or somebody saying, well, my heart's right with the unifying force. Beyond all that, it's just, well, you know, it was worthwhile. I got nothing to say. That's not enough. And there's not much you can do about it. I'm the one that's got to do it. Of course, then you got to help. But I just wanted to tell you that any of you who believe that you have been hanging around the platform, you know, for too many days or weeks or months, I'm quite aware of it. And this thing cannot simply stop it, somebody feeling better, can it? If you want to stop, you ought to die. I'm not encouraging any of you, I don't. But if you insist that, boy, I feel so good, you know, I don't, whatever you're suspecting, that you're suspecting I'm going to come up with something and, you know, change the direction, everybody's got to get out and hustle and hand out Seventh-day Adventists to people in their homes. I didn't say literature, I said any of you suspect that something may come up and your suspicions, whatever they are wrong because they're just wrong. But any of you suspect that and you think, God, it's been so neat now I wish we could just leave it here. Then I'm just suggesting that, you know, maybe you should consider balancing out your present personality by putting 2 or 3 ounces of lead over here on this side. Even this can't stay in the same place forever. And certainly you can't. Even those of you who think you have deep roots in the 5 boroughs of New York. Think again.